pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to some more films I should have talked about years ago. And well, today comes a time where, if you can't already tell by the kind of movement that's being presented here, as well as the change in quality of the film, well, that's simply because all of that is different. Because I am using my new camera for the very first time, the Canon G7X PowerShot series Mark III. And I tell you, it's pretty satisfying at this moment. So totally going to be worth $787 of mine, just like that. Of course, I might have to put out a few other things out there, such as modifications and accessories, just so I can be all set with this. But not to get off track, I will say that this thing sure is going to serve its purpose well to continue on with my work here on Kaiju Force Neo. Vlogging, episode production, film production, and otherwise. Well, anyways, it's time to talk about something different. Another film from 2019, summer of 2019 to be more specific. This was at the time the most recent Annabelle film, which of course has been part of its own little tangent so far, but the Annabelle film series, not only being something that tried to capitalize on the famous success of Child's Play, which to this day has been ongoing. Even though it had been rebooted around the same time back in June 2019, Child's Play was something that had pretty much become a long-running series itself. And there have been a bunch of other series that I've come to know about that have tried to capitalize on the success of this, including Annabelle, and then there was the Brahms series, which I'll probably talk a little bit about those later. But it's now time to talk about, at the time, the most recent Annabelle edition, known as Annabelle Comes Home. This was released in late June 2019, alongside a few others here and there, like Dark Phoenix and obviously the latest Child's Play reboot to the franchise with Mark Hamill and whatnot. But I will say that for a film out there in the Annabelle series, this one is probably average by any means. The Annabelle series has had its own long-running tangent throughout the 2010s, similar in ways to how the Conjuring series has become rather successful over the years. Then there's the Purge series, and then of course we have ourselves the long-running, well, Jeepers Creepers. But I will admit that at this point, Annabelle Comes Home is probably not as bad of a movie as most people might find it. It might have low ratings on various platforms out there like IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, and even Metacritic, but it does have its own ways of trying to entertain us, even if it might suck for some people. A lot of us can find some good value within it. I especially like how the cast itself takes place, with actors like Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson. Of course, we've seen Vera Farmiga in the Monsterverse, where at the same exact year, well, the month before then, with Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I referred to as Long Live the King. And then, of course, we have Patrick Wilson, who would eventually become a main cast member in Midway, which would also be released in 2019, just a few months later. Otherwise, most of the actors, as well as the crew members here, they're probably average by most standards. And many of them are not as well known, especially by me, and I tend to know a lot of people from at least one particular film. It's kind of like when I first got to know about Patrick Warburton thanks to things like Family Guy and the Bee Movie, as well as, well, eventually I found out about Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. And let's not also forget about how Michael J. Fox first started to become very popular in the 80s thanks to Back to the Future and a few other unique shows and movies. But in this case, Annabelle Comes Home kind of gives us a whole new feel when it comes to bringing in well-known actors, plus some not-so-well-known actors. And I can also point out that it does try to put together some new liberties in a way. Being a more recent incarnation of the character Annabelle, who of course is that freaky voodoo doll who has also made cameo appearances in various other films. I will admit that there was actually an Easter egg in Shazam, which was also released in 2019, that happened to feature the doll itself. Yeah, it took me a little while to figure that out, but in the end, I mean, that's kind of another good way to put that together. Otherwise, I will point out that the film itself is a bit average. Having a bit of a plot, plus a bit of horror, plus a bit of, well, an attempt at comedy that kind of flopped in some ways, but in the end, I feel like that the answer to the questions on anybody's minds right now about how if the film is good or bad, I will say it's maybe slanted down the middle. Of course, I will admit, this is one of those cases where I have not actually watched it fully, but that's because it's very hard to find on most platforms. I might have to sink in some money into it, but at least for what I've seen and what details I still remember at the top of my mind, judging by the kind of stuff that it has, the kind of attempts that it has in terms of its comedy and horror, which some of them don't do so effectively as many other horror films in this day and age have actually done. Because, well, that's sort of a requirement. When you get a horror movie out there, it started all the way back in the 70s with the slasher film series that pretty much began with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and actually reached its peak by the time Halloween was released in '78. And since then, the past 30, 40 years, we have actually gotten ourselves a lot of horror films to pretty much show for as a way to pay homage to these older franchises. But as for Annabelle Comes Home, one of the most recent incarnations of this, well, little tribute to Child's Play, as I might see it, I'm going to have to give this score to this film as a 6.0 on this one. 6.0. Again, it's average. There's plenty of room for improvement, but it has already gotten itself a lot of mileage to at least attempt to get to a certain stage where it could be considered enjoyable. But I will admit that, again, I have not seen it fully, so it's not entirely fresh in my mind. But thanks to how long I've worked with the Marcus Theaters Corporation, I was able to catch several glimpses of it. Pretty much. During shifts. Otherwise, that's pretty much just all I'm going to be able to say for it right now. But I will say that tomorrow is going to be a little bit better. Simply because I will have more to talk about in the future. So if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.